Hello and good afternoon. Thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. My name is Ryan Boyles, the owner and editor of Health News Illinois. We have a wonderful panel with us today to talk about the state of medical research. So, thank you so much to our esteemed speakers for sharing some valuable time with us today. I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Patrick Seed, President and Chief Research Officer at Stanley Mann Children's Research Institute at Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. Michael Rosen, the Managing Director of Innovation and Research Park and Helix 51 Incubator for Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science, and Dr. Scott Oakes, the Vice Dean of Clinical Science Research, Biological Medicines or Biological Sciences Division at the Pritzker School of Medicine at the University of Chicago. John Conrad, the President and CEO of the Illinois Biotechnology Innovation Organization, should hopefully be joining us momentarily. We apologize for the delay, had some technical issues, but we're ready to get the ball rolling now. And before we do get started, I do want to thank the generous sponsors of the Health News Illinois virtual event series. These important discussions would not be possible without their support. So a huge thank you today to Molina Healthcare and United Healthcare. Additional slots are available to sponsor our future virtual events. If interested, please contact me at rvoyles@healthnewsillinois.com. Health News Illinois is an online, nonpartisan news service. In addition to hosting events like this, we also publish a daily email newsletter. If you're not yet a subscriber, I encourage you to sign up for a free trial. You can do so on our website at healthnewsillinois.com. And I want to give an extra shout out today to United Healthcare, today's featured sponsor. We are very grateful for their generous support. Here to say a few words this afternoon is Thomas Kunst, the United Healthcare of Illinois CEO. Tom, I'll kick it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks for the panelists. I'm very excited to hear the discussion today. As Ryan mentioned, I'm with United Healthcare, and we are certainly honored to be here with with everybody here today in the conversation hosted by Health News Illinois. Can't thank the team enough at Health News Illinois and their continued commitment for delivering timely, in-depth reporting on issues that shape the state of healthcare landscape. I can't think of a better time to make sure that we're having these conversations, just given the environment that we're in today and the important work that's being done by the institutions that are going to be on the panel today. At United Healthcare, our mission is simple but powerful: to help people live healthier lives and help the health system work better for everyone. And that certainly cannot be done without the work that our provider partners do in caring for their patients, the research that they're doing, the innovation that they bring to the healthcare landscape. As we look ahead, we remain committed to collaborating with our employers and providers and policymakers and community organizations to build a more equitable and sustainable healthcare system. I am really excited to hear today's conversation. Everybody reads about the different opportunities in terms of how technology is going to advance some of the research that's out there. I'm really excited to learn about that. We oftentimes get questions from employers about where this is leading, and it's exciting opportunities out there for everybody, and most importantly for our patients. So again, thank you, Health News, for bringing us together, and look forward to today's conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tom. Let's just start right into the conversation. And Dr. Oakes, I want to just go over to you on this topic. And to put it bluntly, there's been a lot of upheaval in recent months as far as medical research. Specifically a lot of changes at the National Institutes of Health, the world's largest public funder of research. Whether that be staffing reductions, policy shifts, or grant cuts, been a lot of flux right now. And so, Dr. Oakes, I want to start with you, and I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the connection between NIH and the University of Chicago. Just how much is your institution receiving, and just how many staff are being supported by these grants?
Yeah, it has been an interesting time, that's for sure, and a very challenging time for biomedical research in general in the United States. The you know the it's remarkable that the NIH actually was originally founded in 1887, and it's now, as you said, the largest public funder of biomedical research. And it would be really, I think, hard to name another American institution that's had a greater impact on humankind. And largely because of the NIH, America leads the world in medical research. And NIH funding has contributed to 99% of all FDA-approved therapies, saved countless lives around the globe, not to mention fueling the biopharmaceutical industry, which currently employs over 1 million U.S. workers. And in 2023, for example, every dollar that of research funded by the NIH generated $2.46 in economic activity, a total of nearly $93 billion. The University of Chicago has a large research footprint. We received last year approximately $338 million in total NIH funding at our organization. This funds hundreds of research laboratories and a large number of staff across the institution, and it's a critical part of our research portfolio and continues this federal, academic federal partnership that has really existed in over the last 70 years in the U.S. and is the reason for why we have all those statistics I mentioned.
Great, thank you. Dr. Seed, I want to go over to you on that. Can you just tell us a little bit about the connection between NIH and the Stanley Mann Children's Research Institute, and just what's the significance of these funds to the organization?
Yeah, thanks for that. First, thanks for having me on the panel. This is really a great event and important to highlight. I think Scott brought up a number of the significant aspects of how the NIH affects health across the US and really the globe in general. So first of all, to give everybody a little bit of level setting, so Stanley Mann Children's Research Institute is part of Lurie Children's Hospital. Our academic affiliation is with Northwestern University, but we're an independent organization right off the bat. We have about 750 investigators as part of our investigative teams here, and our research portfolios it's smaller than a university setting. So we receive about $30 million a year from NIH funding, and our overall portfolio is around $100 million from the NIH in general. And this is part of a portfolio that's has other revenues through industry-sponsored trials and industry-related work, foundations, and other work. So, but it's a really meaningful one for us. It is one that is centered on what is supposed to be a national strategy around pediatric and child health. And so it's incredibly important for us to be part of that, both shaping it through what our investigators put forward as investigative work, and for the commitment that the federal government has in increasing the wellness of children, youth, and young adults, which is the major focus that we have as well. I think right now we are particularly concerned about some of the challenges to pediatric funding. The U.S. population is about 23% children, and NIH funding is about 13%. So proportionally, when you cut pediatric funding, which we are seeing quite a bit of, it's a disproportionate cut to pediatric related health research relative to even adults for those cuts. So it's quite meaningful for us. We also have a unique training workforce that the NIH is really important for in terms of early career awards, those early awards to support young investigators and trainees as well. And once again, the pediatric or child health related research workforce is that much smaller and more strained than that's serving the different aspects of understanding adult diseases. So it's challenging for all of us that there are definitely some unique aspects of child health that are being particularly targeted and are potentially going to have multi-generational effects because of some of these funding related changes that we're seeing right now.
Absolutely, Dr. Seda. We will definitely be following up on that later on. But Michael, I want to go to you on this question. And can you just tell us a little bit about the connection between NIH and the work being done at the Innovation Research Park and the Helix 51 incubator? Just what is the significance of these funds, and just what all do they support?
So obviously, so Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science is a medical university. We have 6 schools, all medically focused. We have the Chicago Medical School, which dates back to 1912, the Scholl School of Podiatric Medicine, also dating back to 1912, College of Pharmacy, a College of Nursing, and 2 other healthcare related colleges. Um, obviously our research endeavor is much smaller than University of Chicago, Northwestern, even probably Stanley Mann. However, we have areas of expertise that I think that are certainly impacted by the changes at the NIH. 2 areas of research that I will mention today that we're so we have about a dozen research centers within our research enterprise. We've got over 150 researchers at the university. We collaborate. Right next door to us is the Lovell Federal Healthcare Center, which what I would say is we don't have our own hospital, is kind of a clinical collaborator to our preclinical discovery work. And they have the Naval Hospital, the Great Lakes Naval Base is surrounding our enterprise, and they have the Naval Hospital as well as a VA hospital. And so 2 areas that are significantly impacted, I would say, are our Center for Genetic Diseases, which looks at a whole series of genetic diseases ranging from cystic fibrosis to a series of neurological disorders to certain types of cancer as well, which are genetic. We also have a Brain Science Institute, which focuses in 3 centers, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, et cetera. Another would be our Center for Psychiatric Disorders, looking at areas of anxiety, stress, autism, depression, et cetera. And then finally, our Center for Brain Function and Repair. All of these have been centers that have been awarded NIH funding over a number of years. Now, the impact, obviously, of the NIH, I think in general is the NIH has a $48 billion budget, or had a $48 billion budget, and 83% of that budget is usually awarded to what's called extramural research outside of the NIH through 50,000 competitive grants to more than 300,000 researchers at 2,500 universities, medical schools, and other research institutions in the state. So, the impact now of the cutting of the 2 impacts, I think, that are critical, not only the cutting of the NIH budget, but also the limiting of what are called indirect costs in NIH funding. So the indirect costs obviously vary university, and it's a negotiated rate between every university and or research institution and the NIH. But traditionally, they can range from anywhere from 50 to 60% beyond the direct research costs. And under the new administration, that has been capped at 15% indirect costs. So it's a huge impact, not only the cutting of the NIH funding in general, but the cutting of this indirect rate has a significant impact to research funding.
Absolutely. And Michael, I'm glad you mentioned the indirect cost. We will absolutely be getting to that later on today. I know that John Conrad is calling in right now. John, are you able to hear us? Oh. All right, John. Well, while you are figure that out, Dr. Oakes, I'll move over to you then for a little bit here. Oh, John, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. I had to figure out how
No,
to do *6.
hey, no worries at all. Hey, John, thank you so much for jumping on today. We really do appreciate it. I know it's a busy day for you. And so, John, obviously, we're kind of talking, just kind of getting a broader idea, just kind of, some of the effects. So I want to talk to you a little bit about if you could just tell us a little bit about the impact that some of these changes at the NIH have had across the state. And just can you tell us a little bit about how NIH funding in Illinois impacts the private industry?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, so iBio, so we're a trade association that represents the life sciences industry in Illinois, and you know, what we've really seen in the state, and I know you've got a great lineup of universities here talking, is that, you know, over the past 10 years, our industry has completely shifted within the state, and our universities have really stepped up to focus on creating this startup ecosystem that we have that's really driving innovation and growth that we have here. And our main concern is that, NIH funds this very early stage part of this innovation ecosystem. And if we shut off the kind of water faucet at the beginning, the down kind of stream are going to be very major. And that's what really kind of concerns us when we're looking at this issue is the ability for research to continue to fund this. We're very and watching it at the very kind of earliest stages, and I think it's a little bit but we are.
Oh, John, unfortunately, we're losing you a little bit here.
Ryan, can I just maybe compliment a little bit John's comments?
Yeah, please.
So as I run Rosalind Franklin's Science Park and our incubator, and we have obviously a number of startups coming from all over Chicago, including from Stanley Mann. So thank you, Dr. Seed, for the great research that you're doing there. And we also have startups coming out of University of Chicago. So thank you, Dr. Oakes, as well. I think, one of the basic, what we call seed fund for research for early stage companies is called the SBIR program, Small Business Innovation Research Grants, phase one and phase two. And phase one grants typically are in the $300,000 to $500,000 range for companies. And then if you get a phase one, you have access to a phase two, which can be between $1 million and $2 million. The success rate on applications is typically for a phase one is 20%, traditionally 20 to 22% for a company applying for these grants. Now it's been estimated that with what's going on with the funding and the restrictions on funding, et cetera, that dropped down to about 10%. So meaning that only 1 out of 10 grants will get funded. So that is a big impact on startup companies throughout the nation, and obviously as John Conrad mentioned, our startup initiative in our 6 medical schools in Chicago, plus other research institutions in Chicago, it's going to have a big impact on the initial funding. This is before usually investors get involved. So this SBIR fund is really the seed funding for before investors will get involved. And it's really to help drive proof of concept data forward. So I think there'll be a big impact on that aspect of the NIH as well.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, and that's something we're watching very closely. It's up for renewal this year too at the federal level. So they'll be looking to make changes, and that's one thing we have to stay diligent on is watching that and making sure that program continues to run.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. Hey, Dr. Oakes, I want to go over to you now and just kind of, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit, as some of these changes have been happening, has there been any sort of changes to the work that's being done at the University of Chicago? Have there been any particular grants that actually have been affected at this point?
Yeah, so in the Biological Sciences Division, which includes the Pritzker School of Medicine, we've had maybe about $25 million in total NIH funds funding that has been terminated. That has the areas where there's been the biggest impact have been infectious disease. So there's a lot of HIV grants that have been terminated, vaccine hesitancy, in grants that promote diversity in the workforce. Those are the main areas. So yes, it's caused a lot of turmoil in some case. The grants that It's also caused a lot of confusion for these investigators. Some of these were, multi-year grants that then got terminated in the middle. And we are doing our best to provide bridge funding to help faculty to be able to continue the work while they reapply and while they look for other sources of funding. But it's been a very big challenge.
Thank you. Dr. C, what about you? Has there been any particular grants or initiatives that have been affected at this point?
Yeah, so unfortunately, yes. And actually, I'm going to overlap a little bit with what Scott just said. So we've seen awards, particularly in the area of again, infectious diseases, vaccine hesitancy, and HIV has actually been a big one we're part of. In fact, we have a number of international leaders in some of the large HIV networks, and those unfortunately have been targets of terminations at this point. And then the other thing uniquely we have is around some of the gender related care and doing research around that. The added dimension, though, I want to add is we're being affected both by the direct terminations at our organizations, but science by default is teamwork. And so it involves collaboration across many organizations and institutions. So it's also hard to exclude the effects that are happening, both on those things that we're having direct subawards. So we are receiving dollars from other organizations that are the primary awardees receiving those dollars. But actually, then there's other collaborative networks that are part of research that there may not be large dollars that are part of, but they're incredibly important to understanding a wide variety of problems. And some of those I'll just highlight are particularly in pediatrics are a big deal because often they're rare diseases and there aren't enough children at any one place to understand that disease or to do clinical trials. So when any part of that network is being affected, it can have a really large effect on understanding these different populations of U.S. citizens who need the attention of that science through those networks.
Absolutely. And Dr. Sam, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's something I've been reading about, especially in the pediatric space. And I'm curious just what have the conversations been like, with you and your colleagues about how to sort of fill that gap to, make sure that you have a big enough pool for some of these, research initiatives.
Yeah, so it's obviously there's a lot in flux. I'm not sure that we know. I think as everyone knows, there's been a lot of turmoil and a lot of change. But I think we're going to, as you said, sort of fill in the gaps and create bridges with this. Is that we're fortunate that there are a lot of disease-specific foundations and entities that are mobilizing to ask how they can fill in some of those gaps. I will say, in many cases, these organizations don't have the dollars to match what the federal government can do. So some strategies are to actually completely fill in, but many are actually to try and keep the area of science alive and active while figuring out what's going to happen at the national level and how we might have some administrative changes down the line that have different foci and what talk about what are the priority areas for science down the lines. But there's a lot of private. There is a lot of private, very generous private organizations that are trying to fill the void of what's a difficult space to fill in the absence of federal funding.
Yeah, I'd like to echo on to what
Please.
Patrick just said. Disease-based foundations, I think, particularly in the United States and some European countries, play an important role in research funding. We ran a panel a few weeks back on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, and one of the comments that was coming from a major pharmaceutical company, well known, I won't mention the name, but well known in Chicago, mentioned that Google's support, for instance, in Alzheimer research is actually larger than that of the NIH for that particular disease area, which was kind of astounding. So these disease-based foundations, I think, are going to have to play an important role. I think Bill Gates just announced earlier this week or last week that he plans to kind of up his, he's been a very important player in infectious disease area research around the world, and he plans to up his game in terms of research dollars from the Gates Foundation.
Great. And Michael, I'm glad you brought this. I had this later in the panel, but we'll just jump right into it about, the private funding, from, individuals and groups like that. Just kind of how important do you think that's going to be moving forward? And then also, I guess a side question to that is just how sustainable is that for medical research, having, focusing more on private rather than public for these efforts?
Yeah. So I'd actually comment on that a little. So first of all, these foundations are going to be extraordinarily important, but they're important in two ways. So they're important in the way that I think Ryan, your question leads to, which is in material support, right? It actually is the grants and the support that they do for this. But actually, the advocacy is equally as important right now. We know that a lot of these cuts are movable. And it's really a matter of groups coming forward and talking about the importance of what they do. And so I think that there's a political side in terms of these organizations, some of which have very active advocacies, and some of are learning on the spot. They're rapidly learning about the importance of their voice, and then in some cases they're going to be mobilizing actual resources. And I think it varies a lot. There are some disease centric organizations that have quite large research portfolios and abilities to advance, and others do not. And so they're trying to understand how to create unique partnerships among related diseases or disease networks to actually pool their dollars together to bring those forward to enable more research in this time.
Fantastic. Great. Michael, did you want to weigh in that at all?
No, I echo Patrick's comments exactly. I think the only issue I would say is the NIH traditionally's focus on research had been a core part of it had been what I would call discovery research or very early stage research. Although the NIH has certainly put a stronger emphasis in the last few years on translational research, i.e., something that would translate into clinical trials. Uh, um, but usually most of the foundational work is going to be focused on this translational area, I think, rather than the early discovery component.
Fantastic. Great. John, if you're there, I'm just curious if you could just kind of what your thoughts are on this, on the role of, individuals and the private sector filling in some of the gaps as far as, funding for research initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, our member companies obviously do a lot of research collaboration with universities. We see, they do a lot of research with University of Chicago and Northwestern. I think one thing that really helps our universities, but also helps kind of promote kind of at least investment within the state of Illinois in research partnerships are, some new state incentive programs like the new innovative voucher program, right? So it's providing innovation vouchers for companies that are interested in doing research or partnering in research within the state of Illinois. And I think that, those kind of programs are going to be very important to attract those kind of research partnerships that maybe wouldn't have usually looked at Illinois as a good research partner. So, we're seeing that those vouchers are getting used, and I think that is an area. I think when we look to like clinical trials, it's another area where there's a lot of opportunity in Illinois. We have a large population. We don't necessarily track that many industry-sponsored clinical trials as compared to some other states. So there's definitely some opportunities there to bring in more private investment from the kind of like larger pharma and medical device companies.
Thank you, John. Dr. Oaks, I want to go to you and kind of get this from the university perspective. Just kind of what do you see as the role of, private individuals like Bill Gates and just, this private funding for, efforts at places like University of Chicago?
Yeah. So I think the other panelists have all made excellent points around this overall topic. I clearly the funding for research overall is continuing to evolve and be more collaborative. That it is involving federal sources, private foundations, industry. and I think we should embrace that. We should continue to develop it. We need to explore new ways of working, between say academia and industry to find ways of partnering and bringing things to the market. However, I want to go back to Michael's point that at the same time, I think it's very, very important not to pretend that those are going to be replacements for the federal government. The really the what the NIH funding has done, it's been really the goose that lays the golden egg. It is funding that extremely fundamental discovery-based science where people are asking questions just for how does the biology work? How does and and finding new components of cells and understanding them. And it's from that you have unexpected discoveries that change fields, that these are the things like CRISPR that allow you to now go in and surgically correct the genome, and similar discoveries that have totally transformed, even in over the last couple decades, the way we treat diseases. So and companies are unlikely to fund that type of science because it hasn't been de-risked. It's unclear what the application is, and that's what the federal government has done, and that's why we've been so amazing as a nation in this, and we have to help and remind the public of that so that they fall in love again with medical research and medical discovery. And so I think a really important part of this is to really remind ourselves why we do medical research, why we invest in it. It's our nation's collective response to sort of the disease and we need to, in this time too, I think we need to find common ground. And and we should all agree that medical research is one of those areas where we can all come together. We're all susceptible to disease, and we all benefit from the new treatments that come from the research supported by the NIH.
Fantastic. Dr. Oaks, I want to stay with you for a little bit, and I want to go to something that Michael had mentioned earlier, something that, and I'll get everyone on other panels to weigh in as well later on, but obviously there was a lot of discussion in February when NIH moved to cap reimbursement for indirect cost for grant recipients at 15%. The courts have blocked that policy from taking effect right now. Dr. Oaks, I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about kind of what the impact of that would mean for, for the University of Chicago, and maybe just tell us kind of what are the typical rates that you're receiving now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So indirect costs, it's one of these examples of how we have to find ways of explaining things to the public for why they matter. And this is a really difficult one, frankly, because it's sort of a complicated system that we've built. But the bottom line is that it's a partnership between us and the federal government to conduct research, right? And so in order to conduct research, you obviously need people, you need money in supplies to do the work, but then you need the infrastructure to actually carry out those experiments. And the way it works is that the direct costs are the grants that people have been talking about, where the individual scientists apply for a grant in a very competitive fashion, and a small number of them are funded. But then the indirects that come on top of that are given to the institutions so that to fund the ability of the work to be done. Some have given this example of it's the direct funds are like you go to the grocery store and you buy the things you need in order to make a meal and you bring them home. But in order to make the meal, you need a kitchen and a stove and all of those other things. Otherwise, you're going to be eating raw food, right? And so that's the stuff that the indirects fund. And we currently at the University of Chicago, our indirect rate is quoted as 64%, but the reality is that it's adjusted across different types of grant mechanisms, and on average, it's probably more like 40% when you average everything across the. But I think it's healthy to have a conversation about what the rate should be and how do we set it. But we should go back to those first principles that we really need to support research at universities, and this is a really important part of it. And we have to be able to conduct the research as laid out now. 15% would not allow us to conduct that research at anywhere in the United States, at any institution.
Thank you. Dr. Seed, I want to go to you on that. Just kind of, can you just tell us a little bit about kind of what that sort of a 50% cap would mean for, your organization and just what kind of rates are you currently looking at right now?
Yeah, so Scott made great points and I think gave a nice analogy for people to understand it is a complicated topic. It's one that I will add that is negotiated around some pretty clear parameters though. So I want to make the point because I think somewhere in the public conversation there's an idea that this is sort of goat trading in the market and has this sort of very personal transactional aspect to it. It's really not. We bring a lot of data forward for this. I will just say our rate is quoted at 57%. It's what Scott said. There is some averaging based on those, although most of ours are the studies we have are in places and there are types of awards that they're closer to that 57%. I will tell you our calculated rate is 72%. So in that negotiation, we're actually by default based on the federal government's data that they have us bring to the table. We're actually subsidizing research actually substantially. And we're actually subsidizing, and I'll get to your answer, Ryan, on the costs in a moment, but I want to make these points that there's also a lot of unfunded mandates in particularly the regulatory space in research as well. So for instance, there's often that have come out recently, there have been large guidelines around data repositories and data security. They're not specific dollars. None of our organizations got adjustments to those indirect rates, this is part of the infrastructure. It's protecting in a very important way. None of us would argue that we shouldn't be protecting and sharing data in the ways that are being put forward. But some of these, and there's a large list of these, are mandates that are coming through either policy at the agency level or in some cases law, so through legislation, without any dollars tied to those. And so this adds to the stacking of the additional places where we have to add additional costs and essentially bring dollars to the table that are not coming through the actual grant mechanisms as well. So for a place like Lurie Children's, will this have an impact? Sure, it absolutely will be. It's on the order of millions of dollars a year that we would need to fill in the gap for this as well. I agree with Scott in the sense that it is a good time to ask, why are we doing this? How are we doing this? How can we do this better? And I think in some of these negotiations to actually talk about the real cost of doing business in some cases. So we have some awards for instance, for trainees that actually only get 8% and it's fixed at 8%. Actually, the cost is higher to actually provide the infrastructure for those awards as well. So it might be a chance for us to say, is there a more moderate rate that might be a little lower than what we're getting and is gauged across some other parameters that makes more sense? While at the same time saying, let's actually raise the rates that we're getting for these other awards that are completely underwater in terms of the amount that it actually takes to administer these and to perform the regulation for those. So great chance for a dialogue. I think a lot of chance for creating transparency and education around the topic. And I'm hopeful that we'll find something that will be not as devastating as the 15%, but something much more moderated that makes sense.
Fantastic. Michael, I want to go to you on this. Obviously, you touched on it a little bit ago, but just kind of as we look at this 15% cap effect, just what would this mean for, Rosalind and Franklin, and what steps, if any, are the researchers are taking in response to this?
So, echoing what Patrick just said, we're in more or less in alignment with the indirect rate that Lurie has, and the impact is several $millions a year to our research budget. So it's considerable impact, and obviously at this point this is under court adjudication, and so we're still waiting to see how this is going to be rolling out. But the financial impact is a very serious impact, quite frankly.
Definitely. And then, Michael, I want to stay with you for on this, as we've obviously talked about a lot of uncertainty, a lot of things in flux right now. And I guess just as you look, just what do you think are some of the long-term implications for some of the upheaval that we've seen in recent months as it relates to where medical research is going?
Yep. So remember the impact here we're talking about is we've been talking about so far is NIH only. But don't forget, there's the National Science Foundation, there's the Department of Defense, and there are other parts of government that fund significant research. All are being slashed at this point, and we don't know the implications on all of them. But CDC also, even the FDA itself funds research. And one example is the FDA Orphan Drug Program. There's a considerable amount of research being funded by the FDA in this area. And with the FDA cuts, uh, we're seeing, this will impact significantly biotechnology innovation in the United States for years going forward. And you're seeing that the indirect impact of that is on venture capital now as well. And it's not only do you see the cuts in grant funding, not from NIH, not only from NIH, but NSF, potentially DOD and other areas, but you're also seeing a pullback in venture capital, and even the IPO market has suffered this year as well. So I think the advances in biomedical research in general is going to be a slowdown, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
Having said this, I still am somewhat optimistic, again, with private foundations. So we have in Chicago, and John Conrad will know this well, um, the owners of Meta, I should say the major stockholders of Meta, Chan Zuckerberg set up interesting research fund, and Chicago was one of their bio hubs in the last year or so. So Chan Zuckerberg of Meta history are going to be funding over a period of 10 years, something like $230 million, and set up a Chan Zuckerberg biohub in Chicago, one of only 3 or 4 in the United States right now. And that is very exciting in terms of private activity moving forward.
Absolutely great. Yeah, John, if you're there, can you just tell us a little bit about kind of what you see as some of the long-term implications of obviously, as Michael said, we're not just talking about NIH, we're talking about a lot of different funds across a lot of different agencies. Just what do you see as some of the long-term impacts of all these changes that we're talking about?
I think, Ryan, we lost John. So
Yes.
Oh, all right. I will keep my eye to see if John joins us again. I know he is driving to Springfield right now. So, all right. Well, let me get back to my notes then. And yeah, Dr. Oaks, let's go over to you then. And I want to get your thoughts on something, and just kind of what do you think are some of the long-term implications of these changes that are happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, it, the I think already there's been tremendous damage to the biomedical research enterprise in the United States. Um, the study important studies that have been canceled midstream, data that are being lost and wasted. I they're investigators, very talented investigators in the United States. They're moving to other countries to take jobs there because they no longer see this as an attractive place to do business. I'm really worried about the workforce, the next generation, that we may lose an entire generation of young researchers who, these are the people that go into science are the absolute most talented, gifted, driven people that we have in our society, and they can go in many directions. And if we make it too difficult to go in this one, they will go in another one. And we will lose them. And and so I think, and it, even if you were to try to reverse what we has happened, it would take a long time, even the damage that has occurred to date. So I'm very concerned if we have additional erosion that we're going to have it's going to take us a long time to catch back up.
Definitely. And Dr. Hooks, I'm glad you mentioned that. That kind of was going to lead to my next subject. And Dr. Seed, we'll go over to you on that. Just kind of, there's been a lot of talk about the potential brain drain from some of the changes that we've seen. I've read that some Canadian groups and some European are starting to recruit researchers. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on this idea of the brain drain, how real it is, and how much of a concern it is for you and your colleagues.
I think it's very real, and I think we should look at the mirror very closely here, which is we've been part of creating a brain drain from other countries. We've benefited from incredible talent and intellectual capacity, the innovation, the drive, and the things that Scott's referring to that have not all been homegrown. And so the idea that if we don't provide that fertile ground for people to come and use those talents here, the idea that we're in such a special place in the US that people would still come here despite that, I think we're fooling ourselves. People are going to go to the places that provide that rich environment that's both resources and collectively a culture that, again, getting back to an earlier point that Scott was making about people falling in love with science again, and this being a sort of a universal truth that people value science. It's also that cultural aspect that people are looking for as well. They want to be part of a society that they are recognized not in an egotistical way, but recognized as making these fundamental contributions to a better society and a better tomorrow. And that's a challenge right now in the U.S. So it's not just the pulling out the funding; it's also the attacks on the merits of science and the value of science, and quite frankly, the knowledge base that comes from the scientific apparatus that we have here as well. So I think, again, I agree. This is a multi-generational problem. We're already here. We've seen this in much smaller snippets of science that over the years the federal government has decided is no longer important for us to study. And we've then seen a reemergence of those disease problems only to find out decades later that it's taken that long to actually restore the specialization and the workforce that we need for those. I'm an infectious disease doctor. I give the example of tuberculosis. We thought we had solved the problem. We were very nationally centric in this in the late 60s and 70s. We decommissioned all of our programs, and it's really taken till the 2000s for us to actually restore this. And now we have multi-drug resistant tuberculosis and international travel. And it's one of, you can go through as a science historian and give a large number of examples where we've done this before. Now we're doing it on a mass scale with these different programs. So it really doesn't bode well for us down the line if we don't sort of do a course correction very quickly here.
Definitely. Michael, I want to go to you on this idea of brain drain. Just kind of what are your thoughts on this, and just what are some steps you think can be taken to either slow it down or just kind of get people back into this field here in the United States?
So remember now we've been focusing on the impact of NIH and other institutions' grant cuts. We haven't touched on immigration policy. So immigration policy now, obviously getting incredibly tough, is limiting there are many examples of foreign researchers that have, in many cases, specific visas and even green cards that are running into difficulties coming back to the United States when they leave the United States. And there's been actually a outreach by a number of European research institutions to American researchers to come over to shift the research over there. So it's I think not only the cuts in research funding, but the immigration policy is going to have a tremendous impact on our research infrastructure in the United States.
Absolutely. And Michael, I want to stay with you as we've been doing a lot of looking ahead. One other thing, and there's a lot of things we can get to here in the next 4 minutes before we wrap up. But I'm curious, just with some of the changes, especially at policy at the federal level, what do you think that's going to mean for the issues and the things that research is going to be focusing on going forward? Do you think there's going to be a change as far as kind of what, researchers are going to be looking at?
Well, clearly, I think maybe I think both Patrick and Scott mentioned it earlier. We are currently our current Secretary of Health is not big on vaccines. So vaccine research for sure is going to suffer. And one of the positive outcomes of COVID and the money that government pumped into research during the COVID period of time was the advances in vaccine research. And I think particularly with the mRNA vaccines, significant advances with applications to all kinds of infectious diseases and cancer. And so my concern with the current Secretary of Health's perspective on vaccines is we're going to see a significant cutback in vaccine research and development of new vaccines, which is going to, we're going to be there could potentially be many other pandemics or epidemics that the United States and the world will have to confront in the coming years.
Great. Dr. Oakes, I want to go to you just as you look ahead. What do you think are some of the issues and, conditions that researchers will be focusing on moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you shift the federal priorities, in some, I think they're it will shift to some extent what people are able to focus on. Some of these there are some areas that make sense that they're going to invest in. I think AI, more technology, chronic diseases. These are definitely things that are worth um, investing in. However, at the same time, completely taking our foot off the gas on some of these other important areas, I think, is a concern. Some of those that have been mentioned. So, and frankly, there hasn't still been a lot of clarity from the federal government on what they gave these sort of broad um, um, ideas, but there hasn't really been clarity. And one of the things that we really need in science is predictability in terms of funding and and that would be very helpful if we at least knew how things were going to be for a while.
Fantastic. Great. Well, we are just about out of time. So I want to give each of our panelists a chance for a quick question. I'm a generally optimistic person, so I want to close on a little bit of a high note as we deal with so much uncertainty. And Dr. Oakes, start with you on this one. Just what are some of the things that make you hopeful? What do you think are some of the things going forward that, that give you hope about medical research?
Yeah, I mean, I still think that the American public is simply not going to tolerate a lack of investment in medical research in the long term. I think they and that gives me the most hope that at the end of the day, people what we're doing is mission critical for the health of the United States, for the economic security of the United States. So that's what gives me the greatest hope.
Fantastic. Dr. Seed, what about you? What makes you hopeful going forward?
So one of the things that makes me hopeful, in addition to what Scott said, I agree with him. I think is flipping the page a little bit on asking the question of what keeps people healthy. And I think as a general idea, I think we are in a reality that we have a lot of diseases and a lot of chronic diseases. And I agree with we need to keep our foot on the pedal for those so we don't lose it. But I don't think we've done enough to ask what are the things that provide health resiliency and health wellness, and how do you maintain those? And so I actually think that's a real opportunity for us to take a different view of things, and then subsequently make sure that we have the appropriate funding, and we're driving the next generation of investigators into asking some key questions around those topics.
Absolutely. Michael, I will let you close us out. What makes you hopeful about medical research moving
Well,
forward?
what I'm really hopeful about is the advances in what I would call precision medicine and personalized medicine, and which basically means the traditional approach is one size fits all for a particular disease. And I think the advances in, I think certainly AI, gene therapy, stem cell therapy, um, and cell therapy in general are creating new advances in medicine to not only treat better diseases from a safety and efficacy perspective, but even offer some potential cures for diseases. And so I'm optimistic on the direction of biomedical research. I think that we're going through a rough period right now. I think the private sector, I think, will be stepping up, but the issue, as mentioned earlier by my colleagues here, is the sustenance has always been this great sustenance has always been our national institutions such as NIH, NSF, Department of Defense, et cetera. So hopefully they'll swing back into at some point into the support that's needed. Um, I, I think we're in a great period. Interesting, Chicago has been a gathering place for a number of major research activities, such as around the world. So we just had the American Association of Cancer Research meeting here in Chicago a few weeks ago. The ASCO meeting, the American Society of Clinical Oncology meeting, will be coming in early June, and many other medical, which will convene researchers from around the world. And so Chicago, I think, has a great role to play here as a convener of medical research ideas from around the world. And hopefully we'll retain that uh, role.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. I know it's a little bit of issues here with technical difficulty, but we made it through, and I think this was a fantastic discussion. So thank you so much for taking part. Thanks again to United Healthcare for supporting these fantastic events. And with that, I will wish you all a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
having us.
you.